Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching, whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France. I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. The air in Alara's small living room was thick with the sugary scent of vanilla frosting and the shimmering heat of 20 flickering candles. Leo and Luna, twins, who held the two halves of her heart, stood before the cake, their faces glowing with a light that had nothing to do with the flames. They were 18. A decade of scraped knees, bedtime stories, and whispered secrets had culminated in this moment. Alara's worn floral armchair, the same one she had rocked them to sleep in as toddlers, was her throne, and from it, she watched her life's greatest work. The twins blew out the candles in a single, unified breath, and the room erupted in applause from the small gathering of neighbors and school friends. Her chest swelled with a pride so fierce, it almost hurt. 10 years. 10 years since her sister, Seraphine, had left them on her doorstep, and she had built this beautiful, fragile world for them. It was in that moment of pure joy, with confetti still glittering in the air, that the front door creaked open. Seraphine stood there, a silhouette of impossible glamour against the fading evening light, her crimson dress a slash of color in Alara's muted world. She hadn't aged a day. Seraphine glided into the room, her presence sucking all the warmth out of it. The cheerful chatter faltered, replaced by a tense, uncertain silence. She smiled, a slow, deliberate curving of her lips that didn't reach her eyes, and walked directly past Alara as if she were a piece of furniture. She wrapped her arms around Leo and Luna, who stiffened at her touch. "My babies," she cooed, her voice like honey laced with venom. "Look at you, all grown up." Alara's hands clenched in her lap, the fabric of her simple cotton dress twisting between her fingers. She had rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times, preparing speeches filled with righteous anger and wounded pride. But now, all she could feel was a cold, creeping dread. Seraphine's eyes, the same dark coffee color as her own, finally met hers across the room. There was no gratitude in them, no apology. There was only a chilling, triumphant glint, the look of a predator who had finally cornered her prey after a long and patient hunt. Alara's breath hitched, the air feeling too thin to breathe. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that this was not a reunion. It was a reckoning. The guests, sensing the sudden shift, began to make quiet excuses, melting away, until only the 4 of them remained. The half-eaten cake sat on the table between them, a monument to a celebration that had died. Seraphine paced the small room, her heels clicking on the worn wooden floorboards, a sound as sharp and intrusive as her presence. She ran a manicured finger over a dusty picture frame, a photo of Alara and the 10-year-old twins at a county fair. "You've kept the place quaint," she said, the word a clear insult. Alara sat up, her legs feeling unsteady. "What do you want, Seraphine?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the tension. Seraphine stopped pacing and turned to face her, her smile gone, replaced with a look of cold, hard business. She looked from Alara to the twins, who were watching her with a mixture of confusion and fear. She was enjoying this, Alara realized. She was savoring the power she held in this small, quiet room that had been a sanctuary for so long. Leo, always the braver one, stepped forward. "Mom, what's going on?" The word mom, directed at Seraphine, felt like a physical blow to Alara. 10 years of packing lunches, checking homework, and soothing fevers, and in an instant, she was relegated back to aunt. Seraphine placed a possessive hand on Leo's shoulder. "Your aunt and I just have some things to discuss, darling. Adult things." Her gaze snapped back to Alara, sharp and dismissive. "You did a decent job, I'll give you that. Kept them safe, healthy, raised them in this humble little life." Every word was a carefully aimed dart, designed to belittle the love and sacrifice that had defined Alara's existence for a decade. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. She had given up everything, her dreams, her youth, her own chance at a family, for these children. She had poured her entire soul into them, and now The woman who had abandoned them was standing here ready to claim them as if they were nothing more than a parcel she had left for safekeeping. Alara finally found her voice, the anger inside her burning away the fear. They are not a parcel, Seraphine. They are my life. Seraphine let out a short, cold laugh that held no humor. It was the sound of breaking glass. She shook her head, a look of pity on her face that was more insulting than any scream. "Oh, Alara," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that made the hairs on her arms stand up. "You poor, naive thing. You still don't get it, do you?" She stepped closer, her expensive perfume suffocating. She leaned in, her lips almost touching Alara's ear, and uttered the words that would shatter Alara's world into a million pieces, the words she would never, ever forget. Seraphine's sedimentation to compete. 10 years earlier, the rain had been relentless, hammering against the windows of Alara's small house like angry fists. The world outside was a blurry wash of gray and black, and inside, the only sounds were the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic click of her knitting needles. She was 32 and her life was a quiet, predictable melody. She ran a small online shop selling handmade blankets and children's clothes, a passion that brought her a modest income and a deep sense of peace. Her life was her own, ordered and calm. The sudden, frantic pounding on her front door was a discordant crash in her symphony. It was past midnight, and no one ever came to her door this late. A knot of unease tightened in her stomach as she peered through the peephole. It was Seraphine, her younger sister, looking like a drowned ghost. Her usually perfect hair was plastered to her face, her makeup was running in dark rivers down her cheeks, and she was clutching two sleeping toddlers wrapped in a single, thin blanket. Alara swung the door open, and Seraphine stumbled inside, bringing the storm in with her. "I can't do it, Alara," she sobbed, her body trembling. "I can't." She gestured wildly at the two small children, Leo and Luna, who were then just 3 years old. Their faces were tear-stained but peaceful in sleep, oblivious to the tempest her mother had created. "There's an opportunity," Seraphine whispered, her eyes wide and manic. "A scholarship to a prestigious art institute in Paris. It's everything I've ever dreamed of, but I can't take them. They won't let me." She painted a picture of a desperate artist, a mother torn between her children and her one chance at a real life. She made it sound so noble, so tragic. She promised it would only be for a year, 2 at the most, just long enough for her to get established. She would send money, she would call every week, she would come back for them as soon as she could. Alara looked from her sister's desperate face to the two innocent children sleeping in her arms. Her heart, a soft and pliable thing, ached for all of them. She saw the 8-year-old Seraphine who used to follow her around, the teenager who dreamed of painting the world. She saw the exhaustion and fear in her eyes and believed it. How could she not? This was her sister, her only family since their parents had passed. Alara's quiet, ordered life seemed selfish and empty in the face of her sister's raw desperation. So she did what she always did when Seraphine was in trouble. She opened her arms and took the burden. She carefully lifted the warm, sleeping bodies of her niece and nephew, inhaling their sweet, milky scent. "Okay," Alara whispered, the words sealing her fate. "Okay, Seraphine, I'll watch them, just until you get on your feet." Seraphine's relief was a physical thing. The tension drained from her body, and she sagged against the doorframe. "Thank you," she breathed, the words feeling thin and hollow even then. "You're saving my life, Alara. You're saving all of our lives." She didn't stay long. She kissed the foreheads of her sleeping children with a strange detachment, her lips barely grazing their skin. She scribbled a phone number on a napkin, promised to call the moment she landed, And then she was gone, disappearing back into the rainy darkness as quickly as she had appeared. Alara stood in the doorway for a long time, the cold night air seeping into the house, a sleeping child nestled in the crook of each arm. The rain had stopped, and the world outside was eerily silent. Her own silence, once a comfort, now felt vast and intimidating. The quiet melody of her life had been shattered, replaced by an unknown, terrifying new song. That first night was a blur of confusion and improvisation. The twins woke up in a strange house, crying for a mother who wasn't there. Alara, who had never spent more than an afternoon with a child, was thrown into the deep end. She fumbled with diapers, warmed up milk that was either too hot or too cold, and sang lullabies that were off-key and forgotten halfway through. She sat on the floor between two temporary beds made of couch cushions, patting their backs and whispering reassurances she didn't feel herself. Her needs-orderly home was suddenly littered with sippy cups and small discarded socks. The scent of her calming lavender potpourri was replaced by the smell of baby powder and spilt juice. As dawn broke, casting a pale, uncertain light through the windows, Alara looked at the two small children who had finally fallen back asleep. A fierce, protective instinct, one she never knew she possessed, began to bloom in her chest. They were her responsibility now. She had made a promise and she would keep it. The first year was a chaotic symphony of survival. Alara's small business, once her pride and joy, was the first casualty. The long hours she had once spent sourcing fabrics and meticulously sewing tiny stitches were now consumed by the relentless demands of two toddlers. Her online shop withered, orders went unfulfilled, and her passion project slowly died, packed away in boxes and stored in the attic like a forgotten dream. The money Seraphine had promised, which arrived faithfully for the first 2 months, began to dwindle. The transfers became smaller, then sporadic, and by the end of the first year, they stopped completely. The phone calls followed the same pattern, from daily check-ins to weekly chats, until they became brief, guilt-filled messages left on her voicemail once a month if she was lucky. Paris was harder than she thought, and the art world was brutal. Her excuses were always vague and wrapped in a cloak of artistic suffering. Alara took on odd jobs to make ends meet. She cleaned houses in the evenings after the children were asleep, the smell of bleach clinging to her clothes. She worked weekends at the local diner, serving coffee and platitudes with a weary smile. Every dollar she earned went to diapers, doctor's visits, and shoes for ever-growing feet. Her own needs became an afterthought. Her clothes grew worn, her hair went uncut, and the small luxuries she once enjoyed, a new book, a quiet cup of coffee at a cafe, became distant memories. Yet, through the exhaustion and the constant financial anxiety, a new kind of joy began to take root. It was in the way Luna would wrap her small arms around Alara's neck, her cheek soft and warm against her skin. It was in the sound of Leo's infectious giggles as she chased him around the tiny backyard. They were no longer just Seraphine's children. They were her children. The house, once a sanctuary of solitude, was now a vibrant, noisy, messy home. The walls were covered in crayon drawings of misshapen suns and stick figure families where Alara was always drawn the largest, a towering, smiling protector. She learned to bake dinosaur-shaped cookies, to build magnificent forts out of blankets and chairs, and to be a master negotiator in the high-stakes world of shared toys. She read Goodnight Moon so many times she could recite it in her sleep. These small, daily acts of love became the foundation of her new life. She was building something real, something tangible, brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. The life she had lost, the quiet woman with her knitting needles and her predictable melody, felt like a stranger from another lifetime. This new life was harder, louder, and infinitely more meaningful. But a shadow lingered in the corners of her happiness. It was the constant low-level hum of Seraphine's abandonment. The children began to ask questions she didn't know how to answer. "When is Mommy coming home?" Luna would ask, her big, dark eyes filled with the hope that broke Alara's heart. Alara would offer gentle, evasive answers, protecting them from the truth she was only just beginning to accept herself, that Seraphine wasn't coming back, not soon anyway. Each broken promise, each unanswered call was a small betrayal that chipped away at Alara's lingering loyalty to her sister. The image of the desperate, tear-stained artist was fading, replaced by the silhouette of a woman who simply walked away from her responsibilities, leaving Alara to carry the weight. One evening, while cleaning out a closet to make more space for the twins' things, she found the small, forgotten handbag Seraphine had left behind on that first rainy night. She had meant to mail it to her, but in the chaos, she had forgotten. Curiosity gnawed at her. She unzipped it, the metallic sound loud in the quiet house. Inside, past the old lipstick and loose change, she found a folded envelope. It wasn't a letter from the Art Institute in Paris. It was a final notice from a high-interest loan company addressed to Seraphine for a debt of $50,000. The due date was a week after she had left. There was also a plane ticket, but not to Paris. It was a one-way ticket to a small, obscure city in South America. A cold dread, sharp and sickening, washed over Alara. The story of the art scholarship, the entire narrative of the struggling artist, was a lie. Her sister hadn't run towards a dream, she had run away from a nightmare, leaving Alara and the children in the wreckage. The discovery of the loan notice and the wrong plane ticket changed everything. It was a poison that seeped into Alara's memories, tainting the image of her desperate, weeping sister. The pity she had felt was replaced by a slow, burning anger. She hadn't been helping a struggling artist. She had been used as a getaway driver, an unwitting accomplice in her sister's escape. The $50,000 debt hung in the air, a phantom sum that explained the sudden disappearance and the subsequent silence. Seraphine hadn't been too busy with art classes to call. She had been hiding, erasing her old life and everyone in it. Alara felt a profound sense of foolishness, a deep, embarrassing shame for having believed the dramatic, tear-soaked performance. She had rearranged her entire existence based on a lie, and the weight of that realization was crushing. For the sake of the children, she buried the anger deep inside. She couldn't let them see the bitterness that was taking root in her heart. Their world was already fragile enough without knowing their mother was not a tragic artist in Paris, but a liar on the run. So she continued to build their sanctuary, reinforcing the walls with more love, more laughter, more stability. She created traditions: Friday night pizza and a movie, Sunday morning pancakes, and a yearly trip to the local pumpkin patch. She was determined to give them a childhood so full of warmth and security that it would protect them from the cold truth of their mother's abandonment. She became both mother and father, the provider and the nurturer, the rock they could always depend on. But the secret she carried was a heavy stone in her pocket, a constant reminder of her sister's betrayal. Years passed. The toddlers who had arrived on that rainy night grew into children, then pre-teens. Leo developed a quiet intensity, his observant eyes missing nothing. He was a protector just like Alara, always looking out for his more sensitive sister. Luna blossomed into a gentle, artistic soul, her fingers constantly sketching in a notebook, her imagination a vivid and beautiful world. They were good kids, kind and resilient, a testament to the love that had surrounded them. Seraphine's presence had faded to a ghost story, a myth. Her sporadic calls had stopped altogether after the second year. Alara told the children that their mother was a free spirit, a traveler who loved them from afar, a story that felt less like a lie and more like a kindness. It was easier than telling them their mother had simply vanished. Then, on the twins' 12th birthday, a sleek, expensive package arrived. There was no return address, but Alara knew who it was from. Inside were two identical, top-of-the-line tablets, devices Alara could never have afforded. Tucked inside was a card, the first correspondence in almost 8 years. The handwriting was Seraphine's, a flawless, elegant script. "My darlings," it read, "thinking of you on your special day. I hope these help you explore the world. All my love, Mom." The message was so casual, so devoid of apology or explanation, that it made Alara's blood run cold. It wasn't an olive branch. It was a display of power. It was Seraphine, from whatever life she had built on her lies, reaching back into theirs, reminding them of her existence, and in doing so, reminding Alara of her place. She was just the caretaker. The tablets were a Trojan horse. They brought the outside world and Seraphine crashing into the carefully constructed sanctuary Alara had built. A week later, a friend request popped up on Leo's new social media profile. The profile picture was of Seraphine, looking radiant and wealthy, standing on a yacht with an older, distinguished-looking man. Her name was different now, a new surname Alara didn't recognize. The location tagged was Monaco, not Paris, not South America, Monaco. The lie had layers, Alara realized, like the skin of an onion, and she had only peeled back the first one. A cold fear gripped her. Seraphine wasn't just hiding. She had reinvented herself completely, and now, for reasons Alara couldn't comprehend, she was beginning to turn her attention back to the children she had so easily left behind. The arrival of the tablets marked the beginning of a new insidious phase in their lives. Seraphine, now reinvented as Seraphine Delacroix, began a calculated campaign to win back her children through a digital screen. She messaged them daily, her text filled with dazzling pictures of her life in Monaco. There she was, sipping champagne on a balcony overlooking the Mediterranean. There she was at a glamorous art gala, her arm linked with the same older man from her profile picture. There she was, stepping out of a luxury car draped in designer clothes. She was no longer the struggling artist. She was a character from a fairy tale, a queen in a gilded cage, and she was inviting Leo and Luna to peer through the bars. To Alara, the picture screamed of a life built on secrets, but to the twins, especially Leo, they were mesmerizing. Leo, on the cusp of his teenage years, was captivated. His world, which had always been the comfortable, predictable reality of Viridius Springs, suddenly seemed small and dull in comparison to his mother's glittering existence. He would spend hours scrolling through her profile, a look of awe and longing on his face. He started asking questions again, but this time they were different. They weren't the sad, hopeful questions of a little boy, but the probing, almost accusatory questions of a teenager. Why didn't you tell us she was rich? Did you know she lived like this? Alara's heart fractured. How could she explain the loan notice, the flight to South America, the years of silence? How could she compete with the perfect, curated fantasy Seraphine was selling? Her life wasn't always like this, Leo, she said softly, but her words sounded weak, defensive. But Luna, however, was more like Alara. She was wary, her gentle nature paired with the sharp intuition. She saw the hollowness behind the glamour. "She never asks about us," Luna pointed out one day, her brow furrowed in concentration as she sketched in her notebook. "It's like she's a celebrity, not a mom." Luna's loyalty was a balm to Alara's wounded heart, but it also created a new, painful rift, this time between the twins. Leo saw Luna's skepticism as a betrayal of their mother, while Luna saw Leo's fascination as a betrayal of Alara, the woman who had actually raised them. Their once unbreakable bond began to show hairline cracks, and their whispered late-night conversations were replaced by tense, clipped arguments that Alara could hear through the thin walls of their small house. Seraphine seemed to sense this division and exploited it masterfully. Her messages to Leo were filled with promises of a future he could share with her. "You have your mother's ambition," she would write. "This small town is not big enough for a spirit like yours. When you're older, you can come live with me. We'll travel the world." To Luna, her messages were different, filled with expensive gifts, a professional art set, designer clothes, things meant to entice her to buy the affection she couldn't earn. But Luna would quietly put the gifts aside, preferring the simple sketchbook and pencils Alara had bought her. Seraphine was a wedge, driving herself between her children and between the children and Alara, all from thousands of miles away. One afternoon, Ilara was cleaning Leo's room when she saw his tablet light up with a new message from Seraphine. Curiosity and fear warred within her, but the fear won. She picked it up. The message read, "Don't let your aunt's simple life hold you back. She means well, but she doesn't understand what we're made of. You were born from more than that little house." The casual cruelty, the way Seraphine painted Ilara's love and sacrifice as a cage, stole the air from her lungs. She had given up her life to give these children a home, and now that home was being reframed as a prison. She placed the tablet back on the desk, her hands trembling. She looked around the small, neat room, at the soccer trophies on the shelf, the posters on the wall, the worn copy of a book they had read together 100 times. This wasn't a prison. It was a life, built with love. And she realized with a chilling certainty that she was going to have to fight for it. The fight for her family began not with a bang, but with a quiet, determined resolve. Ilara knew she couldn't compete with Seraphine's money or glamour, so she focused on what she could offer: unwavering love, shared memories, and the simple truth. She stopped trying to shield the children from the complexities of the past and began to share small, carefully chosen pieces of it. She didn't reveal the full, ugly story of the debt and the lies, but she started talking about the early days. She told them about the night they arrived, how small and scared they were. She described how Leo had refused to eat anything but bananas for a week, and how Luna had hummed a little tune in her sleep that Ilara still remembered. She painted a picture not of their mother's abandonment, but of their own resilience, and the family they had forged together in the aftermath. She took them to the park where she had taught them to ride their bikes, to the library where Luna had discovered her love of art books, to the small ice cream shop where they celebrated every good report card. She was reminding them and herself that their life together was not an absence of glamour, but a presence of love. It was a tapestry woven from thousands of small, ordinary moments that together created something extraordinary. She was fighting Seraphine's digital fantasy with tangible reality. For a while, it seemed to be working. Leo was quieter, more thoughtful. He spent less time on his tablet and more time helping Ilara in the garden or challenging her to card games. The tension between him and Luna eased, and the sound of their shared laughter once again filled the small house. But Seraphine was relentless. When she sensed she was losing her grip, she escalated her efforts. The impersonal gifts were replaced by plane tickets. "A surprise for your 14th birthday. I'm flying you both to Monaco for the summer. First class. It's all arranged." The offer landed like a bomb in the middle of their fragile peace. For Leo, it was the ultimate dream come true, a chance to step into the pictures he had been staring at for 2 years. For Luna, it was a nightmare. "Go without me," she told Leo, her voice trembling. "I'm not leaving, Ilara." The ensuing argument was the worst they had ever had. "She's our mother," he shouted, his voice cracking with the frustration that had been building for years. "Don't you want to know her? Don't you think we deserve to know her?" "Ilara is our mother," Luna screamed back, tears streaming down her face. She was here. She was always here. The fight ripped through the house, tearing at the very foundations Ilara had so carefully built. She found herself in the impossible position of mediator, her heart breaking for both of them. She knew that forbidding them to go would only fuel Leo's resentment and prove Seraphine's point that she was trying to cage him. But the thought of them going, of handing them over to the woman who had so carelessly discarded them, was unbearable. It felt like a betrayal of the promise she had made to herself that first night, to protect them. In the end, Ilara made the hardest decision of her life. She sat them both down, her hands holding theirs. She said, "You should go." She looked directly at Leo. "You have questions and you deserve answers. You need to see her life for yourself." Then she turned to Luna. "And you don't have to go if you don't want to. No one will be angry with you. This is your choice." She was handing them the power, trusting in the love she had cultivated for over a decade. She was betting everything, her entire world, on the strength of their bond. Leo's face flooded with relief and gratitude. Luna's was a mask of hurt and disbelief. That summer, Leo flew to Monaco alone. Luna stayed behind, and a quiet, sad distance grew between her and Ilara, a space filled with the unspoken accusation that Ilara had chosen Leo's happiness over hers. The house had never felt so empty. The summer Leo was in Monaco was the longest of Ilara's life. The house, usually filled with the twins' energy, was unnervingly silent. Luna retreated into herself, spending most of her time in her room, sketching. The easy companionship she and Ilara always shared was replaced by a strained politeness. Ilara would cook Luna's favorite meals only to have her pick at them without a word. She would try to start conversations, only to be met with one-word answers. Ilara understood Luna's pain. She felt abandoned by both her brother and, in a way, by Ilara herself for letting him go. The vibrant tapestry of their family life seemed to be unraveling, thread by painful thread. Ilara's heart ached with the loneliness that was sharper and more profound than any she had felt before the children had come into her life. Leo's communications were initially enthusiastic. He sent pictures that mirrored his mother's: the yacht, the infinity pool, the fancy restaurants. His texts were short and breathless, filled with the excitement of a boy living a dream. He spoke of Seraphine in glowing terms, calling her amazing and so much fun. He talked about her husband, a wealthy businessman named Alistair, who was powerful and important. Ilara would read these messages with a hollow feeling in her chest, forcing herself to reply with cheerful, encouraging words. She was determined to not let her own fears and resentments poison this experience for him. If this was what he needed to find peace, she would support him, even if it felt like she was losing him. As the weeks wore on, however, a subtle shift occurred in Leo's messages. The breathless excitement was replaced by a more subdued tone. The flood of pictures slowed to a trickle. His text became less about the glamour and more about small, strange observations. "Mom sleeps until noon every day," he wrote one afternoon. "Alistair is always on the phone. They have staff for everything, even talking to me sometimes." Another time he texted, "I asked my mom about when we were little. She just laughed and changed the subject." He mentioned that he had tried to show Seraphine the video of his winning soccer goal, but she had been too busy taking a selfie to watch it. These were not direct complaints, but they were cracks in the perfect facade, tiny glimpses of the emotional desert that lay beneath the glittering surface. Ilara read between the lines and saw a boy who was starting to feel less like a beloved son and more like a novelty, a visitor being given a curated tour. She resisted the urge to say, "I told you so." Instead, she simply listened. She became his digital confidant, a safe space for him to voice the confusing feelings he was experiencing. She would ask him about his day, about the books he was reading, about what he missed from home. She never once mentioned her own loneliness or the silent treatment she was receiving from Luna. She remained her constant, her anchor, the one person in his life who was not trying to sell him a fantasy. She was just there, as she had always been. The turning point came in late August, just a week before he was scheduled to fly home. Alara's phone rang late at night. It was Leo, his voice small and broken. "I want to come home," he whispered, and she could hear him trying to stifle a sob. "What happened?" she asked gently, her heart pounding. "I got sick," he explained. "Just a bad cold, but I had a fever. Mom didn't know what to do. She told her assistant to call a doctor. She never even came into my room, Alara. She said she couldn't risk catching it before her big charity gala." In that moment, the entire fantasy shattered. A simple childhood illness had revealed the cold, hard truth. Seraphine's love was conditional, transactional, and ultimately selfish. It could not withstand the slightest inconvenience. "I'll book you a flight for tomorrow," Alara said, her voice filled with a fierce, protective love. "You're coming home." Leo's return was not the triumphant homecoming of a world traveler, but the quiet retreat of a wounded soldier. He was thinner. His confident swagger was replaced by a subdued watchfulness. The moment he stepped through the door, Luna, who had been pretending to read in the living room, dropped her book and ran to him. They clung to each other, a silent apology passing between them. The crack that had formed in their bond seemed to heal in that single desperate embrace. They were a unit again, bonded by a shared, unspoken disillusionment. They had chased a ghost and found it to be hollow. That evening, the three of them sat around the kitchen table, the same table where they had done homework and shared countless meals. Leo recounted the summer, not the glamorous version he had texted about, but the real one. He spoke of the vast, empty loneliness of the Monaco mansion, the way Seraphine and her husband lived entirely separate lives, orbiting each other but never connecting. He described how his mother had paraded him around at parties like a prize she had won, introducing him as "my brilliant son who's been living a simple life in America." He was an accessory, a prop in the play of her perfect life. The final straw, the fever and the charity gala, was just the confirmation of what he had been feeling all along. He was not his son. He was part of her image. As Leo spoke, Alara watched the play of emotions on Luna's face. Anger on her brother's behalf, vindication for her own instincts, and the deep, overwhelming sadness for the mother they would never have. Alara felt no triumph, but only a profound sorrow. She had wanted to protect them from this pain, but she realized now that they had to experience it to truly understand it. The fantasy of their mother had to die for them to be free of it. When Leo finished his story, a heavy silence settled over the room. Alara reached out and took both of their hands. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry that she hurt you." "You have nothing to be sorry for," Leo said, his voice firm, his eyes meeting hers with a new maturity. "You were right. This is home. You are our home." The words were a gift, a healing balm on the raw wound of the past few months. In that moment, Alara knew that she had not lost them. The foundation of their family, though shaken, had held. In fact, it was stronger than ever, reinforced by the hard-won truth. The years that followed were different. The ghost of Seraphine no longer haunted their house. She still sent extravagant gifts on birthdays and holidays, but they were now received with a quiet, knowing sadness. The twins would thank her politely via text and then put the items away, unused. They had seen behind the curtain and were no longer impressed by the show. The 4 years leading up to their 18th birthday were peaceful. The twins excelled in high school, Leo in science and Luna in art. They were popular, well-adjusted, and kind. The small house in Viridius Springs was once again a sanctuary of warmth and laughter. Alara's heart was full. She had weathered the storm and brought her family safely to shore. She allowed herself to believe that the worst was over. She had forgotten the kind of person her sister was. She had forgotten that for Seraphine, everything was a long game. The quiet that had descended was not an armistice. It was simply the calm before the final, devastating storm. The announcement that Seraphine was coming for their 18th birthday was not a surprise, but it filled Alara with a familiar, cold dread. She knew this wasn't about celebrating her children. It was about something else, something she still couldn't quite see. The week leading up to the twins' 18th birthday was a masterpiece of forced normalcy. Alara threw herself into party preparations with a frantic energy, as if baking a perfect cake and hanging enough streamers could ward off the impending doom. She and the twins fell back into their easy rhythm, a silent, unspoken pact to savor these last few days of peace. They spent an afternoon going through old photo albums, laughing at pictures of Leo with a gappy-toothed grin and Luna in a princess costume that was 3 sizes too big. In every photo, Alara was there, sometimes a blurry figure in the background, sometimes with the child on her hip, her face a mixture of love and exhaustion. The pictures were a chronicle of their life together, a testament to a family built, not born. Leo and Luna, now on the cusp of adulthood, seemed to understand the fragility of the moment. They were more affectionate than usual, helping Alara around the house without being asked, engaging her in long conversations about their plans for college and the future. They talked about everything except the one thing that hung in the air between them, Seraphine's imminent arrival. It was as if saying her name would give her power, would allow her shadow to fall over them before she was even there. They were protecting their bubble of happiness, holding it carefully in their hands, knowing that a single sharp word could pop it. One evening, 2 days before the party, Alara was in the attic searching for extra chairs when she stumbled upon the box that held the remnants of her old life, the life before the twins. Inside, beneath bolts of unsold fabric and patterns for baby clothes she never got to make, was the small handbag that Seraphine had left behind a decade ago. She pulled it out, the cheap pleather cool against her skin. She had almost forgotten about the loan notice and the plane ticket to South America. She sat down on the dusty floorboards, the single light bulb casting long shadows around her, and pulled out the folded papers. The loan notice was for $50,000. The plane ticket was for one person. It never made sense. Why would Seraphine, if she was running from a debt, flee to South America only to end up living a life of unimaginable wealth in Monaco? A new thought, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of the past. What if the debt wasn't the reason she left? What if it was just a piece of a much larger, more complicated puzzle? Alara's mind raced, trying to connect the dots. The desperation on that rainy night, the lies about Paris, the sudden reinvention as Seraphine Delacroix, the marriage to the wealthy Alistair, the calculated re-entry into the twins' lives. It felt like the scattered chapters of a book I was reading out of order. There was a narrative there, a thread connecting it all, but I couldn't grasp it. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, the truth hidden in the mist below. She put the papers back in the bag and pushed the box into the darkest corner of the attic. She couldn't solve the mystery now. All she could do was prepare for the storm. She went back downstairs, the smell of dust and old memories clinging to her. She found Leo and Luna in the kitchen attempting to frost a batch of cupcakes, getting more on themselves than on the cakes. They were laughing, their faces smeared with chocolate. The sight was so pure, so beautiful, that it brought tears to her eyes. This was real. This was what mattered. Whatever Seraphine wanted, whatever game she was playing, Alara would not let her destroy this. She joined them, grabbing a spatula, and for a few precious hours, they were just a family, covered in frosting, suspended in a perfect, sweet moment of peace before the world came crashing down. The day of the party dawned bright and clear, a painfully beautiful day for what Alara feared would be an ugly confrontation. The house was filled with the scents of baking and the sounds of the twins' favorite music. Neighbors and friends began to arrive in the late afternoon, bearing gifts and well wishes. The atmosphere was light and joyful, a fragile bubble of celebration that Alara desperately tried to maintain. She moved through the crowd with a fixed smile on her face, her eyes constantly flitting towards the front door. Every time it opened, her heart would leap into her throat, only to settle back down when it was just another familiar, friendly face. Leo and Luna were radiant, basking in the love and attention, and for a few hours, Alara almost forgot to be afraid. Then, just as Leo and Luna were about to cut their cake, the door opened and the bubble burst. Seraphine's entrance was, as always, a theatrical event. She was dressed in a pristine white pantsuit that made her look like an avenging angel, her dark hair pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. She paused in the doorway, her eyes scanning the room, a small, knowing smile on her lips. A hush fell over the party. The music suddenly seemed too loud, the laughter too shrill. She was a ghost at the feast, a specter of a life they had all tried to forget. Alistair, her husband, was not with her. She had come alone, which somehow made her presence even more menacing. She glided through the room, a shark moving through a school of fish, the crowd parting before her. She ignored Alara completely, her focus solely on the twins. "My darlings," she said, her voice a low purr that still managed to carry across the silent room. She held out two small velvet boxes, a little something for your birthday. Leo and Luna exchanged a look, their earlier joy extinguished, replaced by a wary apprehension. They opened the boxes. Inside, nestled on black velvet, were two gleaming, impossibly expensive watches. The unspoken message was clear. I can give you things your aunt never could. It was a power play, a gaudy display of wealth meant to intimidate and impress. But the twins were no longer the impressionable children who had been dazzled by a new tablet. They had seen the emptiness behind the shine. "Thank you," Leo said, his voice polite but cool. He closed the box. Luna did the same, offering a tight, forced smile. They did not put the watches on. The rejection, though subtle, was unmistakable. A flicker of annoyance crossed Seraphine's perfect features before being quickly masked by another smile. She turned her attention to the cake, a beautiful three-tiered creation that Alara had spent 2 days making. "How lovely," Seraphine said, her tone dripping with condescension. "So homemade." The party couldn't recover. Seraphine's presence had poisoned the air. The guests, sensing the immense unspoken drama, began to find reasons to leave. Soon the room was empty, save for the 4 of them. The remnants of the party scattered around them like debris from a shipwreck. The silence that descended was heavy and suffocating. This was it. The moment she had been dreading for a decade. Seraphine finally turned to Alara, her eyes cold and appraising, as if seeing her for the first time. "We need to talk," she said, her voice no longer purring. It was flat and hard, the voice of a CEO about to close a deal. She gestured towards the twins. "About their future and my investment." The word hung in the air, ugly and obscene. Investment. It was the first hint of the monstrous truth that was about to be revealed. "Investment?" Alara repeated the word, her voice a strangled whisper. It felt alien in her home, a cold, corporate term that had no place among the worn furniture and crayon drawings. Seraphine let out that same chilling laugh she remembered before, the sound of ice cracking. Oh, Alara, still so sentimental. It's sweet, really, but let's not be dramatic. She walked over to the fireplace and picked up a framed photo of the twins at their middle school graduation. She studied it for a moment, a strange, calculating look in her eyes. When I left, I told you I had an opportunity. I wasn't entirely lying. She turned around, her face a mask of serene confidence. I had met a man, Alistair. He was incredibly wealthy, powerful, from an old family with old world values. He wanted me, but his family demanded an heir, a legacy. Unfortunately, Alistair was unable to provide one. She paused, letting the implications sink in. The room was so quiet that Alara could hear the frantic beating of her own heart. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to slam into place, forming a picture more grotesque than anything Alara could have imagined. Leo took a step forward, his face pale with confusion and dawning horror. What does this have to do with us? Seraphine smiled at him, a predatory, possessive smile. Everything, my love. You see, I had a solution. Two, in fact. I had two beautiful, healthy children. But Alistair's family would have never accepted them then. They were too young, and it would have looked messy. A young artist with two toddlers from a previous unknown relationship? No, it would have ruined everything. She paced back and forth, her voice animated as if she were explaining a brilliant, complex strategy. She was proud of this, proud of her cold, calculated deceit.
So, I made a deal with Alistair, she continued, her voice dropping as if sharing a delicious secret. He would marry me, and I would entrust my children to my kind, simple sister in America. We would let them grow up in a stable, loving environment, far from the complications of our world. And on their 18th birthday, when they were legal adults, I would bring them into the family, not as my secret children from the past, but as my long-lost heirs, ready to be presented to the world. She spread her hands wide, as if unveiling a masterpiece. Alistair's family has a trust, Issy, a massive one. It becomes accessible to his designated heirs the moment they turn 18. It was the price of my marriage, my security. The ugly truth landed in the center of the room, sucking all the air out. Laura felt dizzy, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a gasp. Her 10 years of sacrifice, of love, of struggle, it wasn't a kindness she had performed for her sister. It was a service she had rendered. She hadn't been a guardian. She had been an unpaid, long-term foster parent, raising two children until they were old enough to be cashed in like bonds. The sleepless nights, the financial ruin, the emotional toll, it was all just a line item in Seraphine's decade-long business plan. She looked at Leo and Luna. Their faces were mirrors of each other, frozen in shock and a profound, soul-deep betrayal. They weren't children to be loved. They were assets to be managed. This was the something she would never forget, the moment she realized her entire life had been built on a monstrous lie. The silence that followed Seraphine's confession was a living thing, thick and suffocating. It was broken by Luna, her voice small but clear as a bell. "So, you didn't want us," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of a newly discovered, horrific fact. You just needed us. Seraphine waved a dismissive hand as if swatting away a fly. "Don't be so dramatic, Luna. Of course I wanted you. I'm your mother. I gave you life. And now I'm giving you a life beyond your wildest dreams. Do you have any idea how much money we're talking about? You'll never have to work a day in your lives. You can have anything you want." She looked at them, her eyes shining with a frantic, greedy light, genuinely unable to comprehend why they weren't falling at her feet in gratitude. It was in that moment that Alara saw her sister for what she truly was. Not just selfish, not just a liar, but a woman with a gaping hole where her heart should be. She was incapable of understanding love as anything other than a transaction. To her, Alara's decade of sacrifice was simply a cost-effective childcare solution. The twins' affection was a dividend she was now ready to collect. The $50,000 debt Alara had discovered all those years ago clicked into place. It was likely a loan Seraphine had taken out to stage her initial escape, a small investment in the grand multi-million-dollar scheme she was playing with Alistair. She hadn't been a victim running from debt. She had been a predator hunting for a bigger prize. Alara's own voice when she finally found it was eerily calm. The towering rage she had expected to feel was absent, replaced by a vast, cold clarity. "You used me," she said, the words flat and heavy. "You used your own children. For money." Seraphine scoffed, rolling her eyes. "I secured our family's future. It's not my fault you're too sentimental to understand business. This was a brilliant plan, and it worked perfectly. Thanks to you," she added, with a sickeningly sweet smile. "You were the perfect choice, Alara. So reliable, so trusting, so plain. No one would ever suspect you were part of something so grand." The insult meant to wound barely registered. Alara was looking past Seraphine, at Leo and Luna. She saw the boy who had come home from Monaco, broken but wiser, and the girl who instinctively knew the truth all along. She had spent years worrying that she wasn't enough for them, that she couldn't give them the world. But she had given them something far more valuable: a conscience, a heart, the ability to distinguish between the glitter of wealth and the warmth of genuine love. She had armed them against their own mother without even realizing it. She had taught them to value the very things Seraphine held in contempt: kindness, loyalty, and sacrifice. It was Leo who finally moved. He walked over to the small table where the velvet watchboxes lay. He picked up one, his movements slow and deliberate. For a terrifying second, Alara's heart stopped, thinking he was succumbing to the lure of that promised life. But he didn't open the box. He walked back to his mother, his face set like stone, and held it to her. "We don't want it," he said, his voice devoid of the anger and hurt from their teenage fights. It was a voice filled with a chilling, adult finality. "We don't want any of it. Your money, your life. We don't want you." The words struck Seraphine with the force of a physical blow. The confident mask finally cracked, revealing a flash of stunned, bewildered panic. This was the one variable she hadn't accounted for, that her children might actually reject her. Seraphine stared at Leo, her mouth slightly agape. The bewildered panic on her face quickly hardened into disbelief, then into rage. "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped, her voice losing its smooth, controlled edge. "This is a tantrum. You're overwhelmed. You can't possibly comprehend what you're throwing away. This isn't just a new car or a nice vacation. This is a dynasty. It's power. It's your birthright." She turned her furious gaze on Alara. "This is your fault," she hissed. "You've poisoned them against me. You've filled their head with this sentimental nonsense about love and family because it's all you have to offer. You've kept them small. You've kept them weak." "No," Luna said, her voice quiet but ringing with unshakable strength. She stepped forward to stand beside her brother, forming a united front. "She made us strong." Luna looked at her mother, her eyes clear and unclouded by tears. "For years, I looked at your pictures and I wondered what was wrong with me. Why didn't I feel what Leo felt? Why didn't I want that life? I thought I was being disloyal, but I wasn't. I just knew, somehow, that it wasn't real. Love isn't sending expensive gifts from a yacht. Love is packing a lunch every single morning for 10 years. Love is staying up all night with a sick kid. Love is knowing how to make someone laugh when they're sad. Love is here." She gestured around the small, humble living room, at the worn armchair, the crayon-marked walls, the half-eaten birthday cake. The simple, profound truth of Luna's words hung in the air. Alara felt a wave of love for these two young adults so powerful it almost brought her to her knees. They were her legacy,
Not a dynasty of wealth and power, but a legacy of heart and soul. They were good, and she had helped make them that way. They had seen both worlds, the gilded cage and the humble home, and they were consciously, deliberately choosing the home. They were choosing her. It was a validation so complete, so absolute, that it eclipsed all the pain and sacrifice of the past decade. Seraphine's face contorted into an ugly mask of fury and frustration. She saw her perfectly constructed, decade-long plan crumbling to dust before her very eyes, destroyed by the one thing she had never factored in to her calculations: genuine human connection. Fine, she spat, the word dripping with venom. Stay here. Stay in this pathetic little house with this pathetic little woman. Rot in your simple, meaningless life. But when you're older, when you realize what a catastrophic mistake you've made, don't come crawling to me. The offer is off the table. You will have nothing. Do you understand? Nothing. She was trying to frighten them, to wield their financial future as a weapon, but the threat was hollow. Leo and Luna didn't flinch. They had already had a taste of her world and found it bitter. We already have everything we need, Leo said quietly. He put a protective arm around Luna, his other hand still holding out the rejected watch box. The gesture was clear. The choice had been made. There was nothing more to say. Seraphine stared at them, her chest heaving, her eyes darting between her two defiant children and the woman who had, against all odds, won. She saw no love, no family. She saw only two failed assets and a rival who had outmaneuvered her. The foundation of her world, built on a contract of heirs for wealth, was cracking. She had lost. The realization that she had truly lost, that her grand design had failed, caused something inside Seraphine to snap. The mask of the elegant, controlled matriarch shattered completely, revealing the desperate, frantic woman from that rainy night 10 years ago, but amplified by a decade of entitlement and deceit. Her face, usually a canvas of cool beauty, twisted into a snarl. You ungrateful brats! After everything I planned, after all the sacrifices I made, the absurdity of the statement, her claiming to have made sacrifices, was so profound it was almost comical. She lunged forward and snatched the watch box from Leo's hand, her manicured nails scratching his skin. You think this is a game? You think this is about feelings and hugs? This is about survival. Do you have any idea what my life was like before Alistair? I was drowning. That $50,000 debt was just the beginning. I had nothing. I was going to lose everything. She was confessing now, the carefully constructed lies dissolving in the acid of her rage. I gave you a chance to be part of something great. I handed you a golden ticket, and you're tearing it up for her? She pointed a trembling finger at Alara, her eyes burning with a hatred that was terrifying in its intensity. Ilara stood her ground, unflinching. She was no longer afraid of her sister. She was just looking at a profoundly broken person, a woman so consumed by her own greed and ambition that she had devoured her own soul. Ilara didn't need to say a word. Her victory was silent, standing right beside her in the form of the two incredible people she had raised. Luna, seeing the wild, unhinged look in her mother's eyes, instinctively stepped in front of Ilara, shielding her. The small, protective gesture was the final straw for Seraphine. It was a visual representation of her ultimate failure. Her own child was protecting her enemy from her. With a guttural cry of pure rage and frustration, Seraphine threw the watch box against the wall. It hit with a sharp crack, the velvet box falling to the floor, the expensive timepiece inside undoubtedly broken. "Fine, have it your way," she yelled, her voice rattled. She began to back away towards the door, her eyes darting around the room as if seeing it for the first time. She saw the evidence of a life she had no part in: the school photos, the handmade decorations, the worn, comfortable furniture. She saw a world that had not only survived without her, but had thrived. She was irrelevant here. Her money had no power, her threats had no sting. She was a ghost, and they were no longer afraid of her. She fumbled for the doorknob, her movements clumsy and frantic. She gave them one last look, her face a maelstrom of hate, loss, and a flicker of something that looked like pure, desperate panic. "You'll regret this," she whispered, the threat lacking any conviction. It was the desperate parting shot of a defeated enemy. Then she was gone, pulling the door shut behind her, plunging the room back into a stunned, ringing silence. The storm had finally broken, leaving devastation in its wake, but the house was still standing. The family inside, though battered and bruised, was whole. In the deafening silence that followed Seraphine's exit, the three of them stood frozen for a long moment, the echoes of her rage still vibrating in the air. The smell of her expensive perfume lingered, a toxic cloud that was slowly beginning to dissipate. Then Luna did something unexpected. She started to laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a choked, incredulous sound of pure, unadulterated relief. Leo joined in, a shaky laugh that turned into a sob. And then Alara was laughing and crying with them, and they all collapsed into each other's arms, a tangled mess of limbs and tears and shuddering relief. They weren't just hugging. They were holding each other up, clinging to one another as the aftershocks of the earthquake finally subsided. The 10-year battle was over. The ghost that had haunted their lives had been exorcised, not by anger or revenge, but by the simple, powerful act of choosing love. They had stood at a crossroads, with one path paved in gold, and the other paved with the simple, worn stones of their life together, and they had chosen the familiar path home, without hesitation. Alara held her children tight, burying her face in their hair, breathing in the scent of them, the scent of her family. She had won. Her quiet, persistent, unconditional love had been more powerful than all of Seraphine's money and manipulations. Her investment, an investment of time, of heart, of soul, had paid out a dividend of infinite worth. Later that night, after they had cleaned up the party debris and thrown the broken watch into the trash, the three of them sat on the old porch swing, huddled together under one of Alara's handmade quilts. The night was cool and quiet, the stars bright in the dark sky. "What happens now?" Luna asked softly, her head resting on Alara's shoulder. Alara looked at her two beautiful, strong, kind children, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the porch light. They were adults now. Their futures stretched before them, full of possibility. They would go to college, fall in love, build their own lives. But Alara knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that this little house, this humble sanctuary, would always be their anchor. "Now," Alara said, with a peace she hadn't felt in a decade, "we live." It was that simple. They would continue to live their lives not in the shadow of Seraphine's abandonment or in reaction to her cruelty, but on their own terms, in the light of the love they had for one another. The unforgettable words Seraphine had uttered, "I'm here to collect my investment," had lost their power to wound. They were no longer a mark of Alara's foolishness, but a badge of her victory. Seraphine had come to collect on an investment of money and found it worthless. Alara had made an investment of the heart, and she was richer than Seraphine could ever imagine. The dawn was breaking, and for the first time in a long time, the future looked not like a threat, but like a promise.